Okay, I thought I'd look at some of the strengths and weaknesses of the electoral system for electing the president. Again, this could be quite a good 45-mark question. So I'm going to look at first of all some of the strengths and then look at some of the weaknesses. So in terms of the strengths, one of the main strengths is that the primaries system for the presidential candidates does allow for moderates and also tried and tested candidates to be selected. If you look at 2012, for example, Mitt Romney defeated some of the more extreme candidates from the Republican Party, people like Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich and Ron Paul. If you go back to 2008, Obama and Clinton were both moderates and therefore the election was fairly close between them through the primary season. But the primaries did allow for Obama's appeal outside the party to strengthen, and his organisational skills also allowed to win out, especially in caucuses. So the primaries did allow for these moderates and for people who were well organised to actually win the primary and therefore the nomination for the candidacy. A second strength of the system is the Electoral College does enable a clear winner to be found. And this is particularly important given that the President is the Commander-in-Chief and also Head of State, and therefore many Americans think it's desirable for him to have more than 50% of the vote. So again, recent electoral history shows this. So in 2012, for example, Barack Obama won about 51% of the vote. 2008, he won 53% of the vote. So again, a clear, decisive winner. Third strength of the system is that the primaries and the debates themselves do allow their policies to be scrutinised. So in 2012, for example, there were 3 debates that took place, one of which was on foreign policy. Now, these debates allowed both Mitt Romney and Barack Obama to show their policies and have them scrutinised by one another and to some extent by the public. Now, as we know, things came a bit unstuck for Obama in his first debate and his opinion poll ratings went down afterwards. If you look back to something like 1992, George Bush Sr. Did very poorly in the debates against Bill Clinton and therefore actually lost the election. Now, whether the debate issue is about policies and ideas or more about personalities is up to you. But I would say it's a fairly good strength that this entire system does allow for the candidates to be well scrutinised and their policies. Another strength, of course, is that you could say the campaign finance system does allow for a range of people and organisations to contribute towards the election campaign. So in 2008 and 2012, Obama raised large amounts of money from very small donations. PACs allow pressure groups from both large and small pressure groups to contribute towards candidates. Now, this is protected in the Bill of Rights and has been upheld by the Supreme Court in cases like Citizens United versus the FEC in 2010. So campaign finance in America is seen as a way of people contributing towards campaigns and their freedom of speech. There are, though, some significant weaknesses as well to the electoral system for the American president. And the first one I would say is campaign finance, and you could say that it's actually out of control. In 2012, over $1 billion was spent in the presidential race, mainly on TV adverts, and this has got worse due to the Supreme Court's decision, such as Citizens United versus the FEC, which allowed organisations like super PACs to form. Obama contributed to all of this as well, because in 2008, he refused to take matching funds, which allowed him to raise unlimited amounts of money. So the whole issue of campaign finance would need to be looked at for this type of question. Secondly, you could argue that the campaign is far too long. This has been made worse with things like front loading, which has pushed the primaries earlier and earlier. So the Iowa caucus, for example, now takes place in the first week of January of the election year. So the election campaign essentially runs from January to November. This if you don't take into account the invisible primary beforehand. And in this time, of course, there's TV adverts going out, which therefore add to the cost of the elections, and you've got voter fatigue. Okay. Third weakness is the Electoral College being undemocratic and being unfair to third parties. The Electoral College seems to encourage the stranglehold of the two main parties. It leads to a huge discrepancy as well between the Electoral College vote and the percentage which the candidate actually wins. Again, you have a look in the Bennett book, he's got the figures showing the difference between the two. And the fourth issue, and this is again related to the Electoral College, is that it does encourage swing states. So only few states might actually determine the election result. So if you look at 2012, a lot of effort and concentration was made in states like Florida, Ohio, Colorado, and Virginia. These states seem to be the main states in which candidates spent a lot of their time and a lot of their money. And what this has led to that most states seem to be ignored by the election campaign. So Wyoming, for example, or Maine or somewhere had very little activity taking place. And some of them are quite big states that get ignored. So like Texas, California, New York state. These are big states with lots of people in them, but they essentially get ignored in the election campaign because they're safe states for one or the other party. And this has been encouraged by the Electoral College. A final weakness is there are a number of issues around the actual procedure of voting in some states. This was highlighted, of course, by Florida in 2000, where a lot of votes were not counted, which very controversially, but led to the election of George W. Bush. Even in 2012, there have been some issues in some states regarding their voting machines not working. Another issue you have is something called early voting. In some states like Iowa, for example, and Ohio, you can actually vote 2 or 3 weeks before the election date itself, which means essentially that those people who voted have perhaps missed the last couple of weeks of the election campaign, where an issue might have arisen which may have actually affected their vote if they voted on election day itself. Furthermore to this, of course, is that the elected state officials actually determine some of the voting rules in those particular states. And this was highlighted in 2012 in Ohio, where the Secretary of State for Ohio tried to stop the early voting at the weekend before the election day for everybody apart from the military. This person was a Republican, and he knew that Democrats tend to vote at the weekend before the election. And so this was seen as being politically motivated and a way of stopping a certain group of voters from going to the polls. So these are some of the issues, both for and against the American system being good for electing a US president. And again, these are some of the areas you want to discuss in an exam question which is 45 marks long.